Good evening, everyone, and welcome to our San Rafael Community Wildfire Preparedness Workshop. My name is Rich Shortall, the Executive Coordinator of Firesite Marin. These workshops are designed to help you build the knowledge, the skills, and the confidence that we all need to make our families and homes more safe from wildfire. The workshops are also an opportunity for you to ask questions of your local fire agents and to get updates on the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, which has funded wildfire prevention projects in your area. This workshop, in fact, is funded by the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, which also sponsors the Curbside Chipper Program. We'll hear a little bit more about that later, but I would urge all of you to sign up at chipperday.com/Marin. And by signing up, you can take advantage of free curbside chipper service. It's going to be starting next Monday, so it's right around the corner. So let me now introduce my co-host, Quinn Gardner, San Rafael Emergency Manager. Quinn, tell us a little bit about yourself, please.
Hey, good evening, everybody. Like Rich said, my name is Quinn Gardner. I'm the emergency manager here in the city. I've been here about 3 years. In addition to all hazards, I also very much focus on our wildfire prevention and mitigation and response in the unlikely or unfortunate situation there. So really enjoyed being in the city. I've spent my entire career in emergency management and figuring out how to help people recover from disasters. And this is a great opportunity to try to prevent one here in Marin. So looking forward to hearing from you all this evening.
That's great. Thanks, Quinn. Really appreciate your being here. So tonight's workshop, it's divided into several segments that are introduced by short videos. After each video, we'll come back and we'll talk to Quinn, get her thoughts on that video, and then we'll take questions from the audience. We very much encourage all of you to participate. It's very important. It's very easy to do. There's a little Q&A button down at the bottom of the screen. Type in your answer to the question, or rather type in your question. Any questions that we can't get to tonight, we will respond to later. You can find the answer on the Firesafe Marin website. We do ask you, though, to please keep your questions focused to the content of the evening. So if you have a problem with the lot next door to your house or something like that, it's probably a better time to address that later on, although we'll talk about how those kinds of problems get solved for you. And of course, tonight's presentation will be recorded and it'll be available later on our YouTube channel for future viewing. So if some of your friends or family missed it, or you got to leave a few minutes early, you can still pick up at the very end of it. So our first video tonight features Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority Executive Officer Mark Brown. He's going to be describing the events that took place at the recent glass fire up there in Sonoma. That was last year around the same time that we had the Woodward fire here in Marin County. Mark's home is actually right in the area that was impacted in the fire. He was there at the scene during the whole time, and there's really quite a bit we can learn from his post-fire analysis and walkthrough of what happened. So Jen, let's show the video, please.
Being a resident of the Skyhawk subdivision and being recently retired from the Marin County Fire Department and the new executive officer for the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, I thought this was just too good of an example for us to miss. September 27th, that's the right date, right? The glass fire started in the early morning, 3:30, 4 a.m., something like that. And I'm looking at where it is on the map. I'm going, all right, shouldn't have a tremendous impact for me. Should run in, if it crosses the valley, it should run into the Nuns fire and some of the other fires for 2017. But I think it's far enough south, it's not going to impact me. So if you saw in a presentation, you might have thought, well, that was a funny first picture you put in there, where kind of a dark picture with a little lantern. That's a timestamp. And to give some context to how fast these situations can come about. That's about when I'm hearing sirens. Pull out my phone and I look at the location and I'm like going, that's the absolute worst spot for this subdivision for a fire to start. When I first pull it into the command post, it's 9:15. Finally get situated where I can stand side by side with the incident commander. And as I'm standing next to him, he goes, All right, you're at about 300 to 500 acres, and it's going to be in Santa Rosa in 2 hours. The fire was actually progressing down that slope slowly, and I was actually really happy with the way it was progressing. You go to the next slide, which is the timestamp of 0048. You'll see trees flapping in the wind. It's those trees right there that are flapping in the wind. And again, listen to the wind and look at the change of wind direction. And that's the fire becoming well established in this drainage and making a hard run down this drainage. And this is a high school friend of mine's house. And that's why we have permission to go onto his property. Every time I walk by his house, I'm going, well, Sean, you got privacy, but I'm not sure that's the best thing for you. So when I got down here, the bottom of this brambly rose bush had just gotten going. I squirted it for a little while, got it out, and then you can see not just that corner, but that upper corner of that bush started burning. You see this carcass of a rose bush. You look at the trees, to Todd's point, right, Todd? The trees were damaged by everything else that was burning. The trees really didn't transmit the fire. It was the ember cast that was, in my opinion, coming off of this, getting blown against. And you see that there used to be a gazebo, and then what is Chris? There were some type of vines on the gazebo.
Looks like it could be dry and not a lot of leaves. I'm not sure what it is.
I can't remember for sure, but one thing that bothers me, and it could be after the fact, but the lowest burn is over here.
Propane. Probably fueled by the vines that came into the apple tree and eventually got the propane tank going, but the propane was probably low torture this way.
And it may or may not have been after the house got well involved. But it was, to me, whether it was that piece there, and you see the little architectural feature that creates a chimney type effect, but it was the flammable material that was up against the home. And then the wind pushing the embers from this up against the house and then forcing it up into the attic vents. And so the whole idea of blocked eaves, Vulcan vents, no blocked eaves, no Vulcan vents on this home. And it burned from the attic down. I guarantee you, I watched it. You know, for many of the homes that were destroyed, I really believe that if people had done their home hardening and zone 0 defensible space work, those homes would have survived. If they didn't have flammable material within the 3 to 5 feet of space of their home, if they would have blocked their eaves or they had improved vents so that the fire could not get in their attic, I firmly believe they would have survived this fire. So the newer homes were built to 7A standards. And yes, there was suppression action taken on that deck fire up there. But look at the beating that the side of that house took, and it didn't get into the attic. I have to think that there was Building Code 7A standards helped save that home besides suppression action. But virtually, from what I see, every one of them burned from the attic down. And then, Paul, if you want to talk about what you and I were talking about, please.
Different wood chips really reacted much different than we would have expected. There's a wood chip that has a red dye. That wood chip is what you find at that house that's got the heavy damage to it. It literally consumed every single wood chip between fence line to fence line to fence line. And then immediately next to it, taking the heat that it did, we had that cedar chip, and it didn't do anything. We had multiple yards where the cedar did fantastic. And then just downhill from the red dye chip was the gorilla hair, and we talked to some of those crews, and it took them hours to try and pull apart, you know, six inches to a foot of mulch to fully extinguish it.
This is where I have one of the first pictures from May of 2019, that when I was on one of my walks, and so that first picture is of these two houses, right? Not too much has changed since that picture, minus the fire. And what looked like was the primary carrier fire up that slope?
The fence.
The fence.
Yeah,
The fence, right? And it's somewhat hard to tell exactly what caused the fence to get going. It looks to me that the gorilla hair allowed the fence to get going. If there had been nothing flammable up against that fence, it's unlikely the embers hitting that fence would have got the fence going. It needed something to maintain the heat underneath the fence, and then once the fence got going, it maintained its own combustion and walked up the hillside, and looks like someone went in and kicked a few panels out. It's looking this way. You can see the handrails of a walking path. So you have that beige house. There's a gap in homes that's purposeful. It's an open space. Walking path that comes down, and then the remnants of a house is just on the other side of the gap. So if you look at those pictures, you'll see the second house in had remarkable defensible space work in their property and in the area of the easement below them. And then when you look at the fourth house in, what do you notice in that picture? The house with the remnants of trees below it.
Continuous canopy.
A continuous canopy, and when we get up top and look at it from up there, you'll be shocked how close some of those trees were to the house. It created two different types of ladders as well. Not a ladder up the slope, but also a ladder from the ground into the trees. I think the house with the trees was probably the first house that started.
When were your pictures taken?
What was likely underneath those trees that singed those trees and allowed the fire to slowly creep up that property?
I think mulch, I think a great example is the second tree up, like the deciduous tree up there. It has that nice little ring around it. At least looks like it from here.
Put some mulch around there to help with the erosion, help hold water, so that the trees could have moisture to grow. You'll see the batch of several homes that were destroyed. And in these, to me, these two homes that weren't destroyed. And then we have a home where you see the roof timber still sticking up, and then a home completely on the ground. And it struck me, why is there that gap? And I think when we get up to, you might be able to see why that gap, or why did the new home get involved up there instead of house to house against the wind? What's that, Chris?
That one was surrounded by Italian cypress.
Wait till you see it up top. Of the skeletons of Italian cypress immediately upwind from the structure. And like I will bet a paycheck that that's what burned that house down. The before picture, blackberry and bramble that was virtually impenetrable. And then let's look at this house. I mean, as D-space evaluators and you're looking at this house, what are you saying to yourself?
I would say that those are deciduous trees that didn't ever get involved in the fire, and they browned out because of what was on the ground underneath them. Yeah. So clearance shouldn't mean removing those trees. They probably provided some protection to the house. Limbing them up and cutting this grass that was underneath them right here is what would have made a difference.
I think you're right. Yeah. But trees not being the total enemy is an important message. When we go to this last house up here, you'll see that the trees were damaged because the house burned down. It wasn't the trees that burned down the house. That house we've talked about, the other way around. But the vast majority of the trees, it wasn't the trees were damaged because of the house. If we just do a good job of having separation and not creating that ladder fuel, then we'll be successful. And you see that house right there, that deck caught on fire. And it's probably because the bramble that was in here, that bramble that was holding fire, finally started to carry up the slope. They probably had some stuff that allowed that deck to get going underneath. It took some significant suppression actions to save that home, and they were just lucky that there were fire engines already in this area. Take a look at the fence in between. So whether it was the deck that got the fence going and the fence walked this way, probably what happened, right? But it could have easily been the deck that got the fence gets going over here and then gets into the eaves in another spot. I think that's one of the most important messages we have to drive home. How we're going to keep our communities safer is if we focus from the house and work out from there. And if we make our home in such a way that embers can land on or around the home and our home does not become ignited, then not only is your home saved, but homes downwind from your home are saved.
All right, we'll bring Quinn back in with us now. We're kind of fond of that video because unlike so much what we see the pictures of paradise or places like that where everything is just wiped out. And it's kind of really hard to tell what the vulnerabilities were. where here's an example. You had a lot of homes that didn't burn down, but some right next to each other that did. What were the elements that caused those homes to burn and the other ones not? So Quinn, I saw some of your team from San Rafael was up there. Any thoughts on some of the stuff that Mark had to say?
Yeah, I think that whole experience was really rewarding for the team that went up, and actually continues to be learning opportunities as we bring on new staff for the season. I want to thank Mark for organizing that trip, and I think that's a great summary video, and hope everybody really takes that to heart. There's a few main takeaways that, there was a lot of great information in there that I kind of want to reinforce that I just think were so essential. Is one, how quickly fire can move, and how important that means it is to have your evacuation plan. And we'll talk more about that towards the end of the workshop in terms of preparedness and things like that. But I think overall, just that idea of how important defensible space is, and they went over a variety of things that just really directly impacted the survivability of a home. And there's reasons that we have specific ordinances in the city. There's a reason that we work to enforce them and work with property owners. That 0 to 5 is just so essential. Those ember casts really are the big thing that we're fighting against. It's one of the ways that the fire moves so quickly. And it's one of the ways a lot of home ignition occurs. And so everything we can do in these workshops are hopefully going to be so valuable to make sure that your home is one of those ones that survives in that video, right? And not one of the ones that unfortunately is damaged or destroyed. So I'd love to hear the questions any audience has about anything specific or the whys. And I think that I thought the propane was also something we probably don't emphasize that enough, quite honestly, how important it is to keep those grills and those barbecues away from your home, or at a minimum, make sure that's part of your evacuation checklist, that you're going to move that propane so that you don't have that same outcome.
Great, thanks, Quinn. Some comments, question from the public. Mark mentioned the 7A standards. What's that all about?
Yeah, great question. So 7A is essentially fire code, and I can't claim to be a perfect expert on it, but it creates specific standards for construction material. So one of the, maybe the most obvious, is this idea of dual pane windows, so that the windows can withstand more heat, right? Because if fire breaks through a window, that fire can really quickly get into our houses. And as scary as it is, the interior of our homes, especially with modern material, are pretty combustible. So we want to make sure the fire is not getting in them. So 7A also refers to siding material and a lot of different construction standards. Roofing, the type of roofing material. So wood shake roof is not 7A, whereas something like, almost anything else probably is, quite honestly. The composites, the clay and the slates, metal, all of that would be considered 7A.
Thank you. I see we have another question about mulch. I'll just point out that one of the things that was interesting to me is there were two houses right next to each other, and one had one brand of mulch. I forget what the red one or whatever, and another one had a different brand of mulch. One house, the mulch right next to each other, really did catch on fire and contribute to the deck burning. The other one didn't. We're going to talk more about mulch later on, but the fact is not all mulches are the same. So we'll, as I say, we'll get to that in a bit. Let's see. Another question about defensible space. We'll have a whole section on that, so we'll kind of save that to later. Just the one last thing I want to bring up. Granted, that was a fire up in Sonoma. Around the same time, we had a fire in West Marin out there, the Woodward fire. But these fires do have impacts beyond the area that's burning. You're over there in San Rafael. When we had the fire in Marin and fires throughout California, was there some impact, some experience of that in San Rafael?
Yeah, absolutely. I think air quality is, of course, the first thing that comes to mind, and that impacts people's ability to enjoy outside, especially that's been extra challenging, of course, during a pandemic in our outdoors. There's also real impacts on our mutual aid system. So across the county, all the different fire agencies and across the state rely on each other. So when something breaks out in West Marin, we're going to have San Rafael firefighters out there helping. We keep our consistent staffing here, but that ultimately means our firefighters are working long extra days and aren't available necessarily to respond to other fires across the state. So it's really, there's a lot of different impacts, of course. I'm grateful that in that particular case, very minimal structure loss, but really want to prevent something that devastating from happening in a very urban environment.
Great. Thanks, Quinn. All right, well, let's go on to our next video. In order to understand all of the stuff about defensible space, home hardening, all these things we get into, it's actually important to have a good grasp of basic wildfire science. So our next video is going to focus on that. Jen, could you bring it up, please?
Good evening. My name is Mark Brown. As Rich mentioned, I have the honor to serve as the Deputy Fire Chief for the Marin County Fire Department. And as I was thinking about how to best describe to everybody what or how we got to today's fire environment, it dawned on me that we really have three failures that are disguised as successes. The first one is our total fire suppression policies that we adopted way back in 1910. And California ecology needs fire to be healthy, and we've interrupted that cycle. And so we've created unhealthy forests. We've tried to let those fires burn at times if they were lightning-caused fires and they were in a location where it was safe for them to burn. But if there's a structure threat or a life threat, then we have to go and suppress that fire, which furthers the problem. The next success that is really a failure is the success of pushing people further and further into the wildland, living in the wildland urban interface. And quite honestly, where there are people, there are ignitions. When there's ignitions, we're going to have fire. And where there are people, we have to suppress that fire. So therefore, we're continuing the damage to our forests. And then we get to the most important failure, or a series of some successes, and that is creating our industry, creating our transportation, and our power generation. All of these successes of humankind have they've been a failure to the environment, and through the increase of carbon emissions and what they have done to add to our climate change. And just to give it really succinctly, in California, our fire season has increased by about 75 days a year. So that's more than 2 months a year that we have increased fire season. And therefore, we obviously have more opportunity for fire, but almost as important as that is that the fuels, the vegetation out there just doesn't have the time to recover, doesn't have time to bring in that moisture, and it doesn't have that time to be healthy. So we've created this really vicious cycle. And, as a fire service, we were almost staying ahead of the explosive nature of this new fire environment. Starting in 2013 and a few fires before that, we started to really tip that scale over to where we're not keeping up anymore.
Wildfires are a natural event. A long time ago in California, wildfires were often started by lightning, igniting dry leaves and underbrush in the forests. There were lots of wildfires, but they weren't very destructive because there wasn't as much fuel to burn on the forest floor. Regular fires do the hard cleanup work for us. Native Americans understood that forests were healthier if they experienced lots of small fires, which burned dead wood and debris on the forest floor. They would even set fires to encourage this healthy cycle. This helped large trees stay healthy, made it easier for the native people to hunt and grow food. For the last 100 years or so, we've been putting out wildfires because we were worried that fires were dangerous to people. At first, fighting fires was easy because the forests were clean from years of natural fires. But over time, our forests have suffered. When small fires are not allowed to burn, dead wood and other flammable debris builds up. Now when fires start, they become much bigger and spread fast because the fire has a lot of dry material to burn. Here are two diagrams to describe fires. The first is called the fire triangle. It shows that we need heat, fuel, and oxygen for any fire to burn. The second is called the wildfire triangle. A wildfire needs three special things: fuel that can burn, weather, which is dry and windy, and topography. Topography means the shape of the land. Remember that heat rises, so fires usually go uphill much faster than they go downhill. When it's windy, the wind is stronger at the top of mountains and in the valleys between mountains. So the wind often spreads fires up hills and through valleys. The wind not only forces heat and flames in front of it, but it also sends embers long distances. Embers are small burning materials like leaves and small pieces of wood that can be blown in the wind and smoke. When these embers fall back to the ground, they can start many small fires, called spot fires. When an ember lands near your home, it can start a fire in grass that hasn't been cut, in bushes that have lots of dry, dead leaves and twigs, or on wooden furniture and cushions that have been left outside, or in leaves that are on your roof, in your rain gutters, or on the ground around your house. The embers can also enter homes through open doors and windows, or through the vents that are needed around your home for foundations and attics. Embers are the main causes of houses burning during a wildfire. As climate change warms our planet, wildfire conditions are getting worse. Over time, the average yearly temperature is higher and climbing. Changing climate also affects weather patterns. We're experiencing longer periods without rain, and many trees are dying due to drought. Our fire season is now 2 months longer than when your parents were kids. Many parts of our landscaping are drying out, and this makes the trees and bushes more likely to burn. When we have more strong wind days, all we need is a spark and a wildfire can start, which is hard to put out. Understanding wildfires helps us to live with a natural part of our ecology. We need them to keep our forests in balance, but we also need to understand fire's behavior to know how to protect ourselves and our homes.
The title of this presentation is Community Fire Destruction During Extreme Wildfires, a Home Ignition Problem. Well, so perhaps you say a home ignition problem? Well, duh, we wouldn't be having this if homes didn't ignite. But what if we could prevent homes from igniting and our communities from burning to destruction? So for right now, with our mind's eye, let's visualize our perception of how extreme wildfires ignite homes in communities. So wildfires are inevitable, and thus extreme wildfires are inevitable. And so does this mean that wildland urban fire disasters are inevitable? And my answer to that is no. But you might be surprised based on your perception of how homes ignite during extreme wildfires. So what is the general perception of how homes ignite? Well, here are 3 interview perceptions of home destruction during wildfires. The firestorm descended like a dragon from hell on the foothill neighborhoods and laid them to waste. The wildfire swept through the community with a tsunami of flame. The wildfire literally exploded houses in flames, leaving in its path. It was like a war zone. But when we look at the evidence of the disasters, when we go and examine the evidence of the disasters, the typical pattern of destruction is total home destruction with unconsumed vegetation. So what this scene indicates is that no walls of flame sweeping through communities occur, and wildfires don't literally or figuratively explode houses in flames. So wildfire spreads as a sequence of ignitions, not as a sweeping mass of flame, even in this kind of behavior that we call crown fires in shrubs and trees. So when we see a scene like this, the high-intensity crown fire burning from right to left stops at the first residential street of this neighborhood, just from 40 feet of gap between the canopies at this street. So even without the crown fire, total home destruction occurs on the left side, initiated by burning embers from that extreme fire behavior. So what do unconsumed vegetation and homes adjacent to total destruction indicate? While not spread through the community like a lava flow, flash flood, or tsunami that explodes houses in flame, leaving total destruction in its wake. And very importantly, this kind of total destruction surrounded by green does not indicate high intensity wildfire exposure. So where we have a choice, if we define wildland urban fire as a home ignition problem, we can focus on making our homes ignition resistant during extreme wildfires and prevent ignitions. So preventing ignition and burning within this 5-foot zone next to building materials is a very critical element. But note in this photo, in this scene, that it was the pine needles that burned, not the shrubbery that was over the pine needles, because it's there unconsumed, scorched but unconsumed. And we see a similar scene of where this house ignited and was successfully protected with the same kind of non-combusted, non-consumed shrubs with the pine needles carrying the fire and igniting from lofted burning embers. So we need to create a non-ignition zone within 5 feet of a home and its flammable attachments to prevent this kind of damage and potential total destruction.
It's important to understand that in fire adaptive communities, the public understands certain components. They understand that there's a role that fire will play on the surrounding landscape. They understand that fire authorities cannot save all homes. They may not be able to. And lastly, that the community mitigation actions will reduce the unwanted impacts of wildfire. In a fire adaptive community, the public also is going to take action. They're going to support and enhance local fire protection capacity, what the firefighters can do, and then what they can do through Ready, Set, Go. They can prepare structures for wildfire via either being firewise or living with fire or similar principles. They need to take action to build fire-resistant materials and use low-risk landscapes. They also need to increase and maintain risk reduction efforts over time. This is the holistic approach that the community needs to take under a fire adaptive community model. The community takes a variety of integrative actions specific to their community. So as you can see, there are many different steps that a community can take, and not every community is going to take the same step.
All right, Quinn, I think we're back on here. For the audience, one of the purposes of a workshop is really that you all have takeaways. There's some things we learned. I guarantee if you're going to have one takeaway, it's going to be the role of embers and the importance of zone 0, that first 5 feet. So Quinn, what do you think of Jack Cohen's statement that what we really have is a home ignition problem more so than the wildfire problem?
Yeah, I think that might be one of my favorite video clips throughout that I've quite frankly kind of ever seen. I think it's so real. I think the footage helps people understand it. You see green grass right up until those few feet before the house, and you see well healthy living trees that did fine because they were well spaced. But it's those embers blow against the house, and it's not just where the ember lands, but inherently when you create that structure, the same way all your leaves build up right when they hit something because of the wind. That's happening with embers, and it's happening against your home. And that's the last place you want that happening. So I think it's such a true statement. I think those visuals and seeing, burn down houses and just 30 feet behind them, perfectly healthy live rows of continuous trees. And I think that is what we tried to reflect in our updated ordinance. And that's what we try to reflect in our project planning and our enforcement, is it's not about removing all vegetation. It's about especially that 0 to 5. We can't overemphasize that 0 to 5, especially when you're not using class 7A, right, building materials, and you have combustible materials and things like that as your siding. And it's just so important. And a lot of times we'll talk to a homeowner and they'll say, yeah, but what about that tree way over there? And I think this video does such a great job of showing like that tree is not going to be the problem. And that those crown fires are that spacing will stop the crown fires. And it really is about where those embers land and what they do when they land. And the good thing though with this, and I do hope one of the takeaways is, as scary as some of this is, there's a lot we can do. I think it was Todd, right, that's explaining the fire triangle. And one of 3 things that fire has to have to exist is fuel. And it is completely within our control to manage the fuel that's around our homes. And we do that primarily through vegetation management and also through home hardening. And with that, we really can make sure our homes are going to survive something like this.
Well, that's great. And we're going to get into more detail on exactly how to make that zone 0 safer and the home hardened and whatnot. Another concept that came out of that video that I think is really very important. At Fire Safe Marin, we used to talk about living with wildfire. We live with wildfire, we're always going to have wildfire. I think the new saying now is adapting to wildfire. It's a more positive statement. I thought Chief Tyler did a good job on that. Quinn, how is that concept being embraced in San Rafael?
Yeah, absolutely. It's been a multi-year process and will continue to be, right, to socialize and to adapt. But there's so many great things. There's so many different community-oriented focus points. The chipper days that you mentioned at the beginning of the presentation are such a huge focus. All of our one-on-one educational opportunities, creating demonstration gardens to help with education, really focusing on response. There's just a lot of different ways, and landscape treatment and resident mitigation are probably 2 of the most critical, but we're also, we're touching on policies and procedures. We're touching on infrastructure when we talk about 7A requirements. And then there are bigger community partnerships and engagement, whether it's Firewise communities, neighborhood response groups, or all those other things that really do have the community working together. And I think such an important part that's brought up there that we overlook is all fire is not bad. And that we are in the situation we're in because we've treated all fire as bad, and that we do need to try to figure out ways to get our landscape back to being what it would be if fire was cycling through, because now we're at a point we have such heavy fuel loading because we haven't allowed fire in the landscape. And so another takeaway I'd ask for everybody on the workshop tonight, or that watches it later, is to get a little more comfortable with the idea of fire and prescribe fires. And to start understanding that part of our strategy moving forward, and not just in Marin County, but across the state and across the country, is going to be more prescribed fire that we can do in more ideal conditions that will help us regenerate landscapes and get them back. And then as we do that, we reduce the fuel loading, ultimately reducing the severity of wildfires that start when conditions are less desirable. So I think that's a big one. And I think we'll see more of that in the future.
Well, that's great. I think that's really important. We were having a discussion today. I forget, we were on a website or something, and we were talking, there were some comments about wildfire, and there was a lot of negativity along, oh, if a wildfire comes, we all should just give up. And that's just not true. And you're making that point so well. We can adapt to fire. They're simple, not necessarily expensive steps that we can all take to make ourselves safer. Okay, so that being said, let's get into the topic of defensible space. Jen, please.
I want to illustrate it and bring it to the practical level for homeowners, give you some tips, some ideas of what you can look for and how you can make changes around your home. The first 5 feet is really illustrated right here. We're talking about the surface, the ground, the area right around the outside walls of your house. And we've got a lot of information on home hardening. We've got information on defensible space, landscaping, plant selection. All of these things tie together. They're all important. None of them stand alone. But I really think that we've learned that this zone 0, this first 5 feet, is the most critical place for you to pay attention to. And what I like is that it's also the easiest place for homeowners to take action. So recap here. Most homes are going to ignite from embers. I'm going to show you a couple images that will help you understand what we're talking about when we refer to embers. This is video from a police officer's dashboard cam during the campfire in 2018. You can see the intensity, the number of embers. These are embers blowing across a road. Presumably there are homes in that vicinity. This is a fantastic illustration of what those embers can do, in this case in the forest or grasslands around a community. Again, this is the campfire. These are embers falling from the sky. And look back down when he swings the camera back down. Look what's happened in the few seconds since they turned the camera to the sky. These are spot fires that have ignited in fine grasses, fine vegetation fuels. And frankly, the same thing was happening in the front yards and around the surfaces around homes in that same vicinity. Here's another image, those embers, when they land on surfaces around a home, when they land on the combustible materials around the outside of the home and your bark mulch, for example, those materials where it will ignite, leaving green trees in the vicinity of this home. This is research that I think Steve was intimately involved in, but it's one of the best illustrations. This is a home that IBHS built in a laboratory setting. The right-hand side of the home is built with ignition-resistant materials. The left-hand side, not so much. The left-hand side used a bark mulch within 5 feet of the structure. The right-hand side used a decorative gravel mulch, and you can see the dramatic difference in the resistance to the embers that are being blown at this building. This is just, the best illustration you're gonna see of what we're talking about. This translates directly into the real world. This is a photograph. I apologize that it's blurry. It's the best copy I've been able to find of this picture, but this is a firefighter trying to protect a home during the Woolsey fire in 2018, burning on the same day that the campfire was burning in Northern California. This was in Southern California. And you can see exactly where the embers are accumulating, and you can see that it's the bark mulch around the exterior of this stucco home that has ignited, giving this firefighter a real run for his money. This is where we tie the home itself, the home hardening work that we want you all to do with zone 0 in this area around the exterior of the house. That's 6 inches closest to the ground. The separation between the ground, and in this case, you can even see leaf litter on the ground, and the combustible wood shingle siding. That's the critical 6 inches. Our goal is to keep the fire from spreading from the ground to the structure itself, and creating that separation. In this case, it's 6 inches of exposed foundation that separates the place where the embers will accumulate and the siding itself. Very important. This is an example image from a home in Marin County. This is a home, I apologize that I'm not backed up farther in the image, but what you see here is non-combustible siding. This is hardy shingles with an ember and fire resistant vent, a Vulcan brand vent, and a concrete pathway around the exterior of the house. You're gonna see more images from this in a second. So those things tie together that the structure, or separate the structure from zone 0. And as we've already covered, mulch, your choice in mulch within 5 feet of the structure is absolutely critical. This is an image of a gorilla hair, shredded redwood or shredded cedar type mulch, very commonly used. It's has its purpose in certain situations, but this material does not belong adjacent to your house. What we want to see for homeowners, and this is a simple change that you can make around your structure, we want to see you choose rock or gravel mulch. We want to see non-combustible, non-organic materials used as mulch immediately adjacent to the home. Wood chips or bark are out. They have their place in your yard more than 5 feet from your structure. Shredded redwood needs to be applied very carefully. It's the easiest to ignite. I always point out that that's what the Cub Scouts use to start their campfires. So you want to be very judicious with its use around your home if you live in the wildland-urban interface. Here's an image. This is from the Tubbs fire in Santa Rosa in 2017. This is a home, bark mulch. You can see one of the homes is actually burning in the background, the other is destroyed, and you can see how easily the bark mulch around the outside of the house has ignited. We're talking myth busting tonight defensible space. That vegetation absolutely needs to go. There's no doubt about it. That's a poor choice in vegetation. But that's not all that defensible space is. The choice in vegetation is one small aspect of creating defensible space. Defensible space is not just about the plants. It's about the design. It's about the way you maintain that landscape. It's about the features that you build into your landscape, the permanent features, not just the plants. This is a great photograph just 2 years ago at the Kincaid Fire in Sonoma County, showing very clearly how a landscaping feature, in this case a retaining wall, is helping direct heat away from the house. We hear from people all the time that defensible space, creating defensible space, improving their landscaping is gonna ruin their landscaping. They don't want to see the change in their landscaping. One of the best examples we've seen of a transformation in a yard. Here's the before photo. Here's the after photo. Same photo, same angle. The issues that this homeowner were confronted with were an old wooden staircase that was attached to the house, several inches of bark mulch, a bamboo hedge towards the back of the house and along the side of the house, a dead tree in the yard, and frankly, some areas that weren't landscaped, weren't particularly attractive, which changed to this: attractive use of succulents, use of decorative gravel within 5 feet of the structure. Again, we're not asking anybody to clear all of the vegetation in their yard, but we want people to know that a defensible space, again, not just about the landscaping or the vegetation in your yard, the landscaping features, the other features, the combustible materials in your yard can have just as big an impact on whether your home's going to survive. In this case, a fence. We've talked at length about the importance of protecting fences, making sure that fences are not attached to your structure. This is a great example of a yard that has fantastic defensible space in most senses, but that fence carried the fire directly to the home. This is probably the big one, the mother of all myths. My neighbor's tree is an extreme fire hazard. I have an inbox full of messages that say just that. People write to us, they call us, they're concerned about their neighbor's tree, oftentimes concerned about their own trees. We want people to look down, not necessarily up, when they're thinking about their defensible space. This is a photograph of the Scripps Ranch community in Southern California. This is a neighborhood that was surrounded by eucalyptus trees. Every home had trees in their side yard, their front yard, and their backyard, and every tree survived. None of the homes survived. This gets to the point we make often, that your homes are most vulnerable to embers. The defensible space is not harmful to the environment, although there is a myth floating around that creating defensible space creates harm to animals, plants, insects, and the landscape. This is not the case. You can have a healthy native landscape that's lush, well-maintained, and fire resilient. Myth: defensible space means cutting down trees. This is not the case. Again, we're not talking about the trees when we talk about defensible space, at least not the canopies of them. We want you to look towards the ground. We want you to look at the space around those trees. We want you to maintain a healthy natural forest around your property. This is a community that was losing their native oak woodlands to invasive species like French broom, Scotch broom, and acacia. By restoring the meadow that normally had surrounded these oak trees, they're restoring the health of the native oak forest, and they're improving their fire resiliency. The myth is defensible space means my house fend itself. The defensible and defensible space refers to firefighters. Defensible space as a concept goes back decades, and it really goes back to creating a space that's safe for firefighters to operate. It creates a space around a home where firefighters can protect the home, the firefighters do the defending, and the defensible space makes it safe for them to do that. In California, there are a variety of laws and codes and ordinances that address defensible space, and they address the defensible space around your home in using this theory of zones. Zone 0 to 5 feet, is going to be addressed by a new law a change to California Public Resources Code that'll come into effect starting this year and be phased in over the next 3 years. And that's going to address a number of items that we know now are extremely important to the survival of your home, the combustibles within 5 feet of your walls. Zone 1, 5 feet to 30 feet, is a space where the CAL FIRE and the state law addresses it directly as the lean, clean, and green zone. This is an area where we want to see no dead vegetation at all. Grasses must be cut to 3 inches or less. Trees need to be limbed up 6 feet from the ground or a third the height of the tree. And we want to see spacing put between shrubs and plants. From 30 to 100 feet, the law requires that you provide basic maintenance, not removal of trees, removal of dead vegetation only. You don't necessarily, under the law, need to cut your dry grasses from 30 to 100 feet, although we strongly recommend that. When we look at this in relation to how homes actually ignite, I'm going to close with this. It's a reminder that 60 to 90% of homes lost during wildfires ignite from the embers that land on them or within 5 feet of them. There's nothing in the current law that addresses this issue. So when we talk about defensible space, when we talk about defensible space as a law, when we look at it as a law enforcement issue, we're really focusing on 10% of the homes that are lost during wildfires. But it's important to note that 100% of the homes that don't have defensible space are vulnerable during a wildfire.
Well, Quinn, we saw that Todd addressed a lot of myths there. We sort of like that mythbuster concept. I think you'll be seeing that in our webinars in the future. So what's the experience in San Rafael? Are there some issues about some myths that people have about wildfire and how to protect their home?
Yeah, absolutely. I think I could speak to multiple specific cases about every single one, that Todd went through. I think the big three is this idea that my neighbor is my greatest risk. So unless your neighbor is literally in your 0 to 5 foot, that is probably not the case. And that it's not to say that we don't want to encourage your neighbor to do the same thing we're encouraging you to do, but that you are in control of how you can protect your home, especially that 0 to 5. And within that neighbor category, I would include open space and undeveloped lands. And again, not to say that there's not risks associated with that, but again, that tree on the hill 100 feet from your home is not the same level of risk as that 0 to 5 and that 5 to 30 in this decisions you're making directly on your property. I think the other one is the lack of biodiversity and that ugly thing. And there's so many beautiful examples. I love the paved walking path examples that inherently, create that buffer that can be absolutely beautiful. Obviously, especially with the drought conditions and the understanding that for the foreseeable future, there's going to be some cyclical process there. There's a lot of great drought tolerant plants. We work actually really closely with our pollinator community and working with them. And there's a lot of great options there that can be applied correctly and be both environmentally friendly, pollinator friendly, but also more adapted to wildfire. So I think that overall arching, and I think a lot of people think it's like fire versus environmental, and that's just not the case. And I mean, I think on our staff, we've got a forester, we've got an arborist, we've got 3 or 4 people with environmental studies degrees that all solve fire management, as a way to increase environmental issues and improve them. So that conflict's not there. We work together seamlessly. And when we do butt heads on a particular item or an issue, there's usually a pretty good solution. So I think the myths are well busted, I hope, and certainly happy to take more questions if folks still think some of those things are true.
Great, thank you. There's obviously a lot more information on the Fire Safe Marin website if you want to delve into this deeper out there, our webinars and so forth. Check out our YouTube channel. But I think probably one of the most important ways that people can find out about defensible space in their home is a program that was created by the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, which is the Defensible Space Evaluation Program. Quinn, you want to talk about how that works in San Rafael and what you're seeing with that program?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, the MWPA for us has certainly expanded it. I think San Rafael's been a little bit ahead of the curve for the last couple of years. We've had some type of vegetation management program and defensible space evaluation program for years. But the amazing thing is, I think, and I asked my inspector just to pull numbers from me, so hot off the press, last year we did over 3,000 individual property inspections. Already we've completed over 1,300 this year. So we've got a large team of seasonal staff members on board that are working through the different neighborhoods, as well as a solid team of full-time staff, including arborists and foresters and folks with environmental degrees. And so we're really focused on providing that one-on-one education. So for those in the city, the way that works is we pick neighborhoods, and we're actually picking neighborhoods based on the chipper schedule. So we're trying to be in those neighborhoods, 1 to 3 to 4 weeks before that chipper is due. We have teams in the neighborhood that go, they knock on doors, they explain who they are and say, hey, can I walk your property with you? Can I help give you some tips? Can I tell you how compliant or non-compliant with the ordinance you are? And you get that one-on-one consulting opportunity with somebody that's been trained in this. And then we'll leave you with a report and leave you with recommendations and help you prioritize the work that needs done and help you get signed up for that chipper day or week that's coming up, so that you've got that immediate debris disposal. And we recognize the costs associated with some of that. And I think that's why the MWPA, the chipper program, and everything else. So we're really trying to make that as simple and easy as possible. So it's a great program. We're super excited about it. To brag on my inspectors, today I got 2 positive emails talking about how great they were and professional and knowledgeable they were. So I'm super proud of the team we're building. And they will be in one of your neighborhoods soon. And again, kind of following that chipper schedule roughly. I think we're in Bristol Park and Marinwood, and I think we just finished up Loch Lomond Highlands. So kind of all over the city. We just finished up some areas on Lincoln Hill and Bret Harte. So really trying to touch different places and get people that one-on-one education.
Great. Well, that's wonderful. I really hope people take advantage of that program. If you're home, really engage with them. They're only there to help you. It's not out there to write a bunch of citations. It's really to give you the advice you need to improve your property. And I was going to say more about the chipper, but I think Quinn covered it pretty well. You kind of can't beat it. You get the inspection, and they go, guess what? 2 weeks from now, chipper's coming through. Just throw the stuff out. You don't have to put it in the back of the pickup truck or I'm pretty dating myself, station wagon, and haul it off to the dump. No, we'll take care of all that for you.
Yeah, Rich, and if I can add, I think that hopefully everybody in the city, we mailed out, I think 27,000 of these. So if you didn't get one or it made it into your trash can, let us know. We'll get you a digital copy or a new one. But the city does have different defensible space standards. We just adopted those in March. And so for the wildland urban interface, there's only a few changes, but for folks outside the wildland urban interface, vegetation standards are going to apply to you too, because we recognize the impact of those ember casts, and those ember casts go well beyond what was kind of historically defined as the wildland urban interface. So these are really great educational tools. I know you can't take a ton of it, but again, we can get this to you. So we talk through the zones, and then we talk about all the standards that are specific to San Rafael in those zones. So if you haven't gotten one of these or lost it accidentally into your recycling bin, let us know, and we'll make sure you have the information to walk you through what you need.
Okay, great. Thank you. Lots of information out there for everybody. There is one question that came to public, and I'm not exactly sure how to answer this. So it's asking about the drought and the space around the house being full of moisture. I'll just say this, that the moisture content of a plant really does affect the flammability of the plant substantially. It's definitely true, all plants can burn. There's no doubt. Some are more inclined to do the resins and chemical structure of them. But if a plant is really dried out, it's very susceptible to burning. That's why we get so concerned on a red flag warning day. It's not just the wind on those days, but those days are very dry, and it takes very little time with a dry wind to dry out the plants and whatnot. So if your plants are succulents and they're properly spaced, and you have ideally like a gravel mulch and it's close to the house and they're not too big, yeah, that could be acceptable out there. That really makes a difference. But during the drought, be aware that if things aren't getting water, those plants can dry out and in fact create a problem. So if that,
sorry, if I could just add on that, and I'm not sure if the question might be more about shade and trees, and that's one of the reasons to reemphasize, right? Defensible space isn't getting rid of trees. So that does help keep temperatures down and keep moisture. And I'd also add that when you're considering the moisture level of the plant, obviously looking at how green it is a typical way to do that, but make sure you're looking all the way inside the plant. A lot of the species that we really kind of look at and focus on as being more fire hazardous, prone, not safe, risky, whatever you want to call it, or because they have a lot of dead material in them. And I think it was that last clip that Todd said, this is a bad plant. And on the outside, it looks all green, but the second you pull back that little layer, you've got a bunch of dead, dense material that's just going to go up, and it goes up really quick. And that's specific for San Rafael, why Italian cypress was added to the list of plants we don't want to see right next to your home because of that ignitability potential.
Yeah, well put. In San Rafael, can you request a defensible space evaluation, or is it just by neighborhood?
A little bit of both. So if you are, so depending on the neighborhood, if we come to your house and you're not home, we'll do what we call a right-of-way inspection. So we'll see what we can see from the street, and we do leave letters that say this is what we noticed. Call us, and we'll come and schedule a full report. We will come out and do inspections by request, but we're trying to balance that with trying to stay in front of the chipper schedule. So depending on when that is, if we're going to be in your neighborhood next week, we might just ask, hey, can you hold on? We'll be there soon. If it's something that's more urgent to you, we're happy to come out. And the easy way to do that is just to email us at srfd, and I can respond to this question with this email as well. srfd.dspace@cityofsanrafael.org. And that's all on our website. We've also got a hotline that you can call and leave a message, and we'll get back to you. So we're happy to schedule that. And the chipper schedule is posted on Fire Safe Marin's site. I'm sure Rich is going to pitch that site a few more times. And none of them have started yet. So you haven't missed your chipper day yet. But the first one in San Rafael is not Monday, but the following week on the 24th.
That's great. Jen, if you caught that email address, maybe we can put that out there for the public so everybody has it. Super. Well, that's really good. And hopefully that was helpful for everybody. There's some question about siding, but we'll get into that for when we touch on home hardening. But before we get to that, we're going to change the pace a little bit here. And we're going to show a video from Bruce Goines, who is the president of the board of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, and Mark Brown, who's the executive coordinator of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. Again, none of this would be happening without that organization and the fantastic work they're doing. There's a lot of good people around that, and we're very excited about it. So, Jen, would you mind showing that, please?
Hi, my name is Bruce Goines. I'm honored to be serving as the president of the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. I came here with 45 years as a wildland firefighter and a forester, and managing statewide programs to help communities reduce their wildfire risk. Here in Marin, we're in a very special place. We have the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority, which is a 10-year initiative, and all of our tax dollars are being invested back into the community to help reduce the risk of the inevitable wildfire. I want to just give you a little history, very brief, as to why the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority was created. I think we all know the fires, catastrophic fires that have occurred all around us, to the north, to the east, to the south. Particularly last year was particularly bad. Your County Board of Supervisors had some vision after the Tubbs fire, which resulted in catastrophic events for Santa Rosa and Coffee Park. Your Board of Supervisors commissioned a group of firemen, law enforcement officials, city managers, and county administrators to take a look at what happened up in the North Bay, and what can we learn from that? What can we do to reduce the risk of something like that occurring here in Marin County? So they put together a team who produced a report. It's called the 2017 Lessons Learned Report, which you can find on the MWPA website if you're interested. But the bottom line was, it said that we needed to coalesce to bring all the resources together, all the fire agencies together, all the cities together, and coalesce and figure out and take an aggressive program to reduce our risks. Secondly, the next year, the county supervisors, again, with that report, the 2019 civil grand jury took up this topic. And the civil grand jury affirmed the 2017 lessons report, And in essence, they said, we need to take this one step further. We need to develop a reliable funding source, and we need for all of our fire agencies to coalesce under a joint powers authority. Then came in 2020 Measure C, and there are a handful of people in the room that you're in who were integral to Measure C coming up to the ballot. Morning, noon, and night, they talked with fire districts, city managers, and in essence, Measure C was passed in 2020. It was one of 4 tax initiatives, the only one that passed. And now we have a 10-year opportunity, $20 million a year, $200 million, and which we expect to match through matching funds. But here we are, $20 million a year. The opportunity, 60% of these funds are for vegetation management and clearing, preparing evacuation routes, fire detection and public education. 20% is for defensible space evaluations, and 20% is for local mitigation projects. It's a phenomenal opportunity. This is the opportunity for you, the citizen. I believe your County Board of Supervisors has done their work. I think the fire chiefs are doing their work, and city managers. And this is the time for you, the public, to basically take responsibility and address the hazards and the risks and potentially reduce the potential consequences of a very catastrophic event. So thanks very much.
Hi, my name is Mark Brown, and I have the privilege of serving as the Executive Officer for the Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority. That's after 30 years of serving with the Marin County Fire Department and retiring as the Deputy Fire Chief. At the MWPA, our current focus is home hardening, because what we've learned during catastrophic fires and urban conflagrations is that it's the homes that turn into the primary carrier of fire. And if we can eliminate homes from catching on fire, we can start decreasing the catastrophic nature of these fires. So we want our homes to be hardened so they don't ignite. The next step is that we want a 5-foot non-combustible zone that surrounds our homes so that when embers land around our home, there's nothing to catch them on fire and then catch the house on fire. And then we want to look at smart firescape landscaping to create defensible space. We're not asking people to remove their vegetation. We're asking them to look at how they arrange their vegetation, both horizontally and vertically. We want an ember to land, preferably self-extinguish. But if it doesn't self-extinguish, we want whatever it catches on fire doesn't spread to something else and it just stays within that area. And then finally, we are focused on an evacuation route clearing. There's just so much work that needs to be done. We are so far behind on our vegetation management at a countywide level. Our primary goal is to get people out safely. So we are focusing hard on our evacuation route clearing. To that end, we've purchased the Zone Haven evacuation management platform so we can streamline our evacuation systems. They are not replacing anything that we have currently in place. They aren't replacing, Zone Haven will not replace our notification systems. It will not replace law enforcement or fire going door to door, knocking on your door, telling you it's time to leave. But what it does, it gives us more information so that we can plan better prior to an emergency and during an emergency so we can get people out safer. We are also conducting a study of our ingress and egress routes throughout the county. That way we can evaluate which routes need to be worked on, and we can prioritize and get the routes that need the work the most done right away. Our current schedule of projects includes chipper days to support the homeowners with their defensible space work. Low-income defensible space grants, so those who don't have the financial resources to do the work around their home can tap into those grants in order to make their home safe. Along with their home being safe, that makes the rest of the community safe. And then we are looking at creating home hardening matching grants. So residents that want to work on their home, make their homes hardened so they are less likely to ignite, we will match what they are spending in order for them to improve their homes. We discussed the evacuation route clearing. We see that as one of our most important things that we'll be doing this year. And then we will be working on fuel reduction projects in and around our homes near the open space, the wildland-urban interface boundary. We want to create a space where a catastrophic fire could come into and then actually decrease in intensity as it enters into our homes. And we're going to do that with shaded fuel breaks along that wildland-urban interface boundary. And then you're participating in one of our primary tools right now, and that is public education. And what we found is the more the public understands about wildfire and what they can do and what their responsibility is for wildland fire, the safer our communities will be. And thank you for attending. Thank you for being a part of the solution. And thank you for helping decrease the risk to wildfire in Marin.
All right. Well, this is where I take the opportunity to do somewhat the same thing as Bruce and Mark did, which I really want to thank all of you, because we would not have the MWPA without all the work that went into passing Measure C. Nobody likes paying more taxes, but I think the people of Marin took this wildfire problem very seriously. And this is what's created this great opportunity, this great partnership across all of Marin to really make all of us safer. Quinn, any thoughts on MWPA and working with it?
Yeah, I mean, it's incredible to go from struggling to find a few dollars to be able to address something we know is a hazard to having, you know, a solid budget and a solid plan. And the urgency of the work is not lost on us, and we're really focused on it. I just pulled out my binder of just San Rafael projects. If that gives anyone a visual idea of what we're thinking about and what we've got going on, and it really does span the gamut, like Mark mentioned, in terms of evacuation route, roadside improvements, parking box improvements, really trying to make sure folks can get out and that we can get in, as well as vegetation management, defensible space, public education. It just goes on, and it's such a wonderful way to take, right, that really whole community fire adapted approach. And I want to echo the thanks of you for joining us to get the information and hopefully share this workshop far and wide, and your support of the tax measure, as well as your understanding of new things take a minute. And we're really excited. And I think it's really impressive what the MWA has been able to accomplish in its first year. And I cannot wait to see what the next couple of years hold, because as we develop as an organization and processes and procedures get streamlined, we're going to continue to see that risk reduction just grow and grow and grow across Marin, till we really are a fire adapted community. So we're really excited about it.
Wonderful. That's great. So home hardening. I've been around this wildfire preparedness thing for a while now. And 4 or 5 years ago, people like Jack Cohen knew about this, the scientists who studied these fires and whatnot, but it was really not what people were thinking about. Home hardening really is the focus right now. Defensible space matters a lot. It's not less important, but there's a new focus on that. So let's get into a video that, that explains some of the things we really need to be thinking about when it comes to hardening our homes. Jen?
You need to harden your home. That's why you're here tonight. I'll just point out that the video that's playing there in the background, that's a home in Napa County, Oakville. It's one of the highest homes anywhere in Napa County. It was impacted by this fire, the one that you see there, in October of 2016. This was about a 50-acre fire that started on the roadside and burned directly up to the house, impacted the house. The house escaped this fire undamaged. There was no insurance claim on this property besides a solar panel array that was down the hill in the bushes. The house itself undamaged. 1 year later, almost to the day the Nuns fire started, it was one of the North Bay fires. Started overnight, burned 50,000 acres, and on day 3 of the fire, it impacted this house directly from the other side. The side that you don't see burning here burned 1 year later. The house again escaped undamaged. The reasons for that are the way the house was designed, the materials that were used to build the house, and careful thought to building a fire-resistant structure.
The best place to start when talking about your ignition zones is the actual home and structure itself. And that's where the term home hardening comes in. Home hardening refers to the maintenance of your structure and the upkeep, as well as the building materials that you've applied to your home.
One of the most interesting concepts that have come out of the studies that have been done on the fires, the large fires that have happened throughout the United States over the past couple of years, is this idea that it's not the flame front that actually destroys your house. It's the flying ember storm that will do that damage. So hardening your home actually becomes a very, very important part of this whole wildfire preparedness plan. When it comes to home hardening, there's 2 aspects or 2 ways to look at it. The first is the actual construction of the building itself, and when we look at that side, we see things such as the materials that the roof is made of, the material that your siding is made of, what is actually touching the ground, and we also look at the soffits of the house, for example. Are they closed in or are they open? And then the other aspect that we look at is maintenance. So when we talk about maintenance, we're talking about things like, what are you storing under your deck? What do you have up in your gutters? Do you have leaves that have fallen in there that need to be taken care of? Do you need to clean off your roof? If you have a log cabin, are all the holes filled in with putty? The house behind me has some really great examples of home hardening from the construction standpoint. Right next to the ground, there's nothing that's combustible there. The rock goes clear down to the ground, and for the first several feet coming up, there's no way for a fire on the ground to get into the house. The siding above the rock is limited combustible. That means that it does have the ability to burn, but it's treated with a substance that will prevent it from actually sustaining fire. A lot of the times people like to have a wood siding on their house, and that's okay as long as it's installed correctly and you are using the correct materials. So if you look at the soffits in this house, they're boxed in, and what that does is it protects those areas from collecting any of these flying embers that happen to come along during a wildfire event. And then especially nice on this house is the metal and asphalt shingle roof. This house has a combined, a combo style covering, which is just fine. Both of them are very good at keeping those embers from having a place where a fire can start. Having a redwood deck or a deck that's made of combustible materials is not the end of the world. If you do have that type of deck, you certainly don't need to tear it out. You just need to do a little bit of maintenance on it. Make sure it's treated with a non-combustible sealant. From a home hardening aspect, maintenance is probably the most important thing you can do. No matter what your house is made out of, no matter what material you have on the side of your house, what material your deck is made out of, or what material you have on the roof, that has to be maintained. If you look around your house and you find places where the wind blows leaves, those are the same places where embers are going to come in a firestorm. And those are the same places where those embers will sit there and smolder until the conditions are just right for them to ignite whatever they've landed in. Another large risk for your house is openings. Any opening that goes into your attic, any vents in your soffits or vents even in your gables or on the side of your house, they have the potential of collecting flying embers. Back in the day, we used to put 1/4 inch mesh on these openings to keep things from getting in. The latest science from the large fires that we've had within the United States over the past couple of years has shown us that 1/4 inch mesh is not tight enough.
I am inspired by the Park City Fire Department, and I'm going to harden my home. I'm going to change my attic vents, and I'm going to put screening underneath my decks. And I'm going to teach you how to do it. Let's go. First thing you need to know is I am not a handyman, but I'm going to go for this because I need to make my house more safe. Remove that screen. I can do it. You can do it. Embers out. Measure it first. That is a 2-inch opening, and there is a stock 2-inch vent for you at the hardware store. You're going to use those pliers to pull that wire. You're going to use that hammer to tap in the new vent, and you're going to use that sandpaper to clear out paint and gunk so that vent slides in easily. They are a little fragile. Don't hit them too hard. There's the vents you have to choose from. I chose those Ember vents with 16-inch screen on the backside. Vulcan vents have a different system, and I'll show you. There's the ones I got, 44 of them for around my house, about $1.50 each. This is the Vulcan vent. It's got louvers that keep out the embers, lots of teeny louvers. And on the other side is a honeycomb that will melt if it is exposed to high heat. These are double the price of the vents I went with, so I went on a budget. But I did sand them in carefully, and I worked hard to get them in, and I sanded, and I sanded, and I sanded to get them in. And once you've sanded enough, they slide right in. If you do not sand enough, they will bend and bend. Bend and bent. Here we are. Also, as you make your way around your house, it's a good idea to get some caulk and just fill in holes, any kind of crack or groove that you think maybe embers could embed in and start a smoldering fire. It's thorough, it's good, and now you're done. Look at those vents. The louvers are pointed down. They're in. It's time for some more paint and sanding and make my house more beautiful. But before I do that, I want to work on my low deck out back. It needs some love too. I went and got some screening materials. I got a roll of 1/8" stainless steel metal mesh, easy for me to say. And then I went to my crusty deck and I turned it a little less crusty. I cleaned it up and I got ready to apply the mesh. I measured down and I cut extra. Mesh is malleable. I measured long. It can be formed to the space, but if it's too small, you can't fit it in. And here's some tools I used. First, I used that grinder. Now everybody doesn't have a grinder. You can also use some tin snips, and I'll show you what that looks a little later. As I grinded, it was a little wild and fast, and sparks were flying. Not recommended for the dry season. This is a winter project, winter, spring. You don't want to do it during fire season. These are the tin snips that worked really well. It cut like butter and it was under control. I probably will use these from the future. And here we are underneath. I tacked it up with the staples and just made sure it all fit. And then I came back with my screw gun and made sure it was tight up against the wood. We don't want embers to slip through. Really what you're doing is you're making sure that no leaf matter or sticks or twigs will blow in the during our fog season when the wind howls and would push in unwanted material. And then if you happen to have an ember storm, then that material could kindle and catch this deck. And then I put some rock down even to make sure it would stay down and it wouldn't be up against the dirt and it wouldn't rot as quickly. And this is what it looks like when it's done. It's ready for some more hardscaping. I did put some weed cloth down so the weeds wouldn't come up again. And you can do this as well. Good job, people. You can do it. You know what the steps take. And thank you for making Marin a little bit more fire safe.
All right, we're back again. So internally, we had a little debate, but when we were putting together those videos, we want to thank our friends in Park City. Well, this isn't Park City, though. Believe it or not, it's a little bit hard to find homes in Marin because of when a lot of the homes were built here that incorporate as many of the really ideal brand new home hardening techniques as that home has right there. And they're just really very clear there. And I think it's easy to understand some of the things we're talking about. So that's why we picked that one. And then we thought we'd be a little bit lighthearted for a change. It comes up all the time. Oh, home hardening. Wow, that's going to cost me a fortune. Well, Aaron, who's on our team over here at Fire Safe Marin, as you can see from him, to do some of the basic steps that are out there, replacing vents, doing some of the screening of low decks like that and so forth, and certainly basic maintenance is actually, it is in the realm of a do-it-yourselfer. We have a lot more detail on the Fire Safe Marin website webinars where we really dig in deep about deck construction and soffits and all the rest of that. But we wanted to leave you with something where you felt like, well, hey, I could actually take that on. I could take a look at my home and see what I got here. So Quinn, we know there's all these different things we talked about you can do to harden your home. If you were to pick one thing, what would you say the most important thing that a person could do is?
One thing. So if I say like roof maintenance, I feel like then I can cover the material of your roof, your gutters, and then any openings on your roof or your eaves, which I realize is kind of a cop-out. But I really, having a non-combustible roofing material is really important. We do think we still have a couple hundred wood shake roofs in the city. Those should be getting sunsetted out here pretty, reasonably quick. It's like a 5-year process because we understand it's a big project to re-roof. But on the lower end, and I think that video is great because it shows just how really accessible, and those small things really can make such a huge difference. So I do think the vents and any ember penetration is just really important to look at. Like, what's going to happen when a bunch of embers build up and land here, or can they wiggle their way in under my deck or under my steps and catch the leaf litter that I've let accumulate or anything like that, I think is really important.
Yeah, a lot of times I tell people the screening of the openings, but to tell the truth, gutters are really a big deal. Nobody wants to go up and clean their gutter. It's awful. I've got redwood trees in the back of my yard, and the gutters used to fill up all the time, and I hated having to do that. And it is constant. But there really is very good screening right now, not just coarse screening, but really good screening that's relatively fine, that lets the water in, keeps the leaves out. And a very important component of all that, it's where the gutter meets the roof is an area of vulnerability. You want to have some metal sheathing in up in the roof in there. And that is, it's not high-end expensive, but that's actually worth spending a few bucks on because that's a very vulnerable area that's out there. And then we do have some of the do-it-yourself out there. So San Rafael, there's many different communities in San Rafael. They've been built at different times and whatnot. Are there some things that you see common to certain areas of San Rafael that increase the vulnerability of homes out there when they were built, or screening or whatever?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, outside of location, of course, I think the wood siding, the historic nature of some of our homes, the wood siding and the wood roofs are definitely up there. And that also usually includes single pane windows. And that can be a gradual process. And when we start talking about how to implement 7A into the, across the city, the next time you have to replace a window because a baseball goes through it or whatever the case may be, replace that window with 7A, put dual pane in. And slowly but surely we'll make progress across the city. Or if you can only replace, one side of your house, replace the side that's most likely to face that windstorm and that ember storm and where emissions might occur. The other thing, of course, big in the city is the Eichler homes. All the glass. So it's really important to make sure no heat's building up around that, because that glass is obviously going to crack and create large openings, as well as the open eaves. And so really kind of looking at how to mitigate around that to prevent that ember penetration in those areas.
Great. Another question came up about decking, and decking is always kind of controversial and not easy. What Aaron was dealing with there is, in my opinion, one of the most vulnerable of the deck structures, because it's very low and leaves and debris accumulate under there, even if you're careful. Let's face it, that's just inevitable. And if you do screen decks like that, you can do it in different ways, but it doesn't have the visual impact of a higher deck. So I think that really is the appropriate way to deal that. But in Marin, a lot of homes that are built up on hillsides have the high deck. It's 15, 20 feet up there. And let's be honest, nobody's going to want to screen that with mesh. What people do, which I really don't like, is they'll put a bunch of lattice on there, wood lattice. And what happens with the wood lattice? There's still huge openings. If you look in carefully, it's always tons of leaves in there. What you actually want to do is keep one of those open. And this is where you really want to think about appropriate gravel mulch in there. Really makes sense in keeping that clean. So that's probably the best approach on that. What do you see for our decks over there in San Rafael?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've got a lot of those, and I would totally agree that for some of those colors, I'd also consider maybe a non-combustible lower foot or two. So in addition to keeping it clear that you're really making sure that bottom piece is non-combustible. And then making sure you're keeping the top surface of decks. And I think the redwood deck example, right? It's not about replacing all decks and all wooden decks, but if you keep them clear of debris, that's going to go a long way. And that holds true for the steps that were in the question and anything else. We've got a lot of wooden material in the city. And I think the important thing about home hardening and defensible space and all of these things is that different things are going to apply differently to different properties and different homes. And one of the beautiful things about Marin is we really have that variety, right? We've got like log cabins, brand new construction, and kind of everything in between. And so you need to pick and choose what's going to be the strongest mitigating or the risk reduction activities for your property. So if you can't replace your siding, then let's make sure you don't have combustible vegetation near your siding, right? And that's going to go a long way and possibly further than replacing your siding and putting combustible vegetation right next to it. So there's a lot of options. I know it can feel a little overwhelming, kind of with like a menu of what do I do. but really thinking about those embers, how to prevent that as best you can, which includes, right, the building material as well as the vegetation and the ground covering you have closest to your home.
Great. When the dispensable space evaluations are done and the folks are out there taking a look, do they also look at some of the obvious home hardening issues that are there?
Yeah, we do. It's our current code doesn't have a ton of regulations for existing structure. A lot of the 7A requirements are for new construction or substantial remodels, but we do provide a lot of those recommendations. In our evaluation forms, we actually now have a section specific to home hardening where we can make sure we're calling out those relevant recommendations for those individual properties to help them understand the best steps they can take to move forward.
Yeah. The mesh size for the screening, and I even hear both versions of this at times. Are we looking at 16" or 1/8 inch?
So I think from a requirement right now, I couldn't speak directly to that. I mean, the smaller is going to be better, but anything's better than a big open gap. So I'd say if you already went through and put 1/8 inch on everything, there's probably other things that are better worth your energy that are going to make a bigger difference. If you have no screening and you're starting for the first time, then go with the 16th, right? Go with the smallest opportunity you have so that you can work through that. And the one thing we haven't touched on is stovepipes and chimneys, and just making sure those are closed. Even if you're not using them and you're not worried about the heat that comes out of them, there's still holes into your home. And so you still want to make sure those are covered so that they're not offering embers away into your home.
Absolutely. That's great. Well, let's move on to community preparedness. It's sort of our view at Fire Safe Marin that the most effective way to get the message out about preparedness is really neighbor talking to neighbor. It's, look over the fence and you say, gee, John, what can we do to help get the yard cleaned up here type of thing. So anyway, let's take a look at that video.
Hello. Hi. My name is Nancy. I'm the leader of the local Firewise site for the neighborhood. Okay. And we're all about helping each other fire harden our homes and our gardens.
Oh, well, I could sure use help. I mean, I don't know what you can do, but it's such a mess down there.
Oh, that would be wonderful because we are looking to come together and help out with some gardens that need some extra love and care. And is that something that we could do?
That would be fantastic.
Oh, wonderful.
Yeah. When do you do that?
Well, we try to do it every Saturday or every other Saturday, or just when people can make it, and some people might be able to show up on Saturday, and I think we can pull it together. Would that be good?
That would be fantastic.
Okay, great.
Yes.
So 10 o'clock on Saturday?
Wonderful, yeah. I'll see you there.
Great. Okay.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Hey Ronan, I think Finn's gonna need a walk. Can you take him?
Oh yeah. Hey guys, this is an alert from Alert Marin. There's a fire in the area. The embers shower could happen anytime with these high winds. We need to go.
Okay, let's get going. It's a red flag day, so I've got everything right there inside the door. We've got the to-go bag. I think I've got my glasses. I've got medicine, ID. You two get the puppy in the kennel and load him in the car.
Let's make sure Miss Benson, our neighbor, also has gotten the alert and that she's aware that we have to get going.
Great. Let's get our masks. Get long sleeve shirts, hats. Let's get going.
Hey, Miss Benson, we just got an alert from Alert Marin. There's a fire in the area, and
Where?
we're going to get some ember showers. It's right up on the hill.
Oh my
It's
God.
time to go. Can you get your important papers
Yes.
and your medicines or anything else you need?
I don't have a car.
You could fit in with us. Why don't you come with us then?
Okay. I'll be ready in a few minutes.
All right, sounds
okay.
good.
You want me to get him?
Welcome to Fire Safe Marin's webinar series.
Our fire season has increased by about 75 days a year.
This is how you will receive your emergency notifications.
We continued to go away from the fire, and at this point we started realizing it was around us. We're seeing flames.
We at Fire Safe Marin are excited to be sponsoring a chipper event in your neighborhood. This video shares some simple guidelines for you to prepare your chipper pile to ensure that it will be picked up.
Wildfires have always been a part of California, but recently we've had more fires and they've been more destructive than ever before. That's why we've created this program for you. It's called Ready, Set, Go. When we think of defensible space, it's helpful to imagine different zones, depending on the distance from the building we want to protect. Today, we're only going to talk about the most important of the defensible space zones. Studies have shown that 60 to 90% of homes destroyed in wildfires are ignited by tiny embers.
Hi, I'm Faye Mark from the University of California Marin Master Gardeners. We're often asked the question, what are the safest plants? Truth is, all plants burn. When it comes to fire-smart landscaping, it's much more important to consider where a plant is situated and how it is maintained than to assume some plants are better than others.
In the long run, loss of pollinators could create a shift in vegetation with plant reproduction favored by wind pollination. Wind-pollinated species include grasses and pine trees, which tend to be more fire-prone. Fire safety can be both beautiful and support biodiversity. We can have it all with careful planning.
How does working as a community help improve fire safety?
You can't do everything. You can work on your own property and do everything you need, vegetation management, house hardening, and then if your neighbors don't know what to do or are unaware of the whole process, you're still vulnerable. So when you work together as a neighborhood, you're able to learn how to do it and what to do, and everybody becomes jointly embarked on the same project. I also noticed a very surprising element about forming a Firewise community, and that is that even people who aren't actively members of our group, they might be in a nearby neighborhood or even in our neighborhood but not participating. Once they see us start doing the work, it's a process of modeling. All of a sudden, without us saying anything, they're doing the work themselves, and areas that were completely overgrown are within a month or two suddenly getting clearer, and you can see that they're aware that this is an issue and they're taking it on board and doing it on their own initiative. So that has been a very gratifying area for just seeing how people are responding to the whole neighborhood at work.
It is making sure that everybody gets the information that we want to get to them about a chipper day or a broom pull.
The hardest part is the initial outreach. If you have it on your mind you want to form a community and you haven't done this kind of work before, it can be a little intimidating to reach out. And I think that's the hardest step, is to reach out and find some like-minded neighbors who are also worried about it. The way we did it was we simply put a notice on next door saying, "Hello neighbor, are you concerned about wildfire in your neighborhood?" and suggested a meeting time. And the next step is, having got a few neighbors involved, is we did some door knocking. Obviously in the time of COVID, it's hard to do that. But you can leave information on people's doorknobs or doorsteps, and built our database. And that's really very important, because once you have your database, you have the people that you reach out to. They don't have to be the people who come to the meetings. They just are people who are interested in the topic. And then once we're all connected, we started the process, and it was very straightforward.
The Firewise community is a way of getting people to address a problem. So people looking at Paradise, looking at the Napa and Santa Rosa fires, we're ready to say, yeah, it's possible we could have a fire here. Let's do something about it. And it's not onerous, and maybe if we work together, we can figure out what to do best.
We've introduced you to what community preparedness looks like. Yet, we know it's quite another thing to embark on this endeavor in your own community. So, FireSafe Marin has created what we call the Universal Firewise Activities, or UFAs. These 7 activities will help you build a robust fire-adapted community. The first UFA is to develop a comprehensive contact list of residents. You can reach out to your neighbors on Nextdoor by posting an announcement inviting people to join your efforts. You can print out door hangers and place them on gates or under doormats. Once you get an initial interested group, host a social event. You can do this via Zoom and show one of FireSafe Marin's videos and have a Q&A after. Or, once it's safe, you can host a neighborhood block party and spend a few minutes letting people know things that they can do to make your community safer from wildfire and inviting them to join. One of the best ways, of course, is to reach out to the neighbors that you are already friendly with. Share your ideas. Surely they know other neighbors who may want to join efforts to make the neighborhood safer from the threat of wildfire. Holding regular meetings keeps the efforts rolling. Some communities do this monthly, others quarterly. It depends on what your community wants to do. You can hold meetings via Zoom to talk about concerns and activities. Try showing one of our 5-minute videos posted on our YouTube channel and have a discussion after. Of course, when it's safe, you can hold meetings in your home or on the patio. But I have to say, Zoom has been a bit easier. No need to tidy up or rush out the door. A key aspect of being a fire-adapted community is education. FireSafe Marin has several resources for you to pull from. Our website has a nationwide audience owing to its depth of information. There, you can find printable materials such as our evacuation checklist and homeowner's guide to wildfire preparedness. Over 75 videos and webinars can be found on our YouTube channel. Guest speakers include top fire scientists, veteran firefighters, and the latest information in the world of fire and wildland-urban interface. Don't forget to refer people to our Facebook page for quick updates. Fuel reduction can go a long way to make our neighborhood safer for members. Encouraging participation in free annual Chipper Day events is a good way to make some headway. You can email those on your contact list, distribute door hangers, post the event on Nextdoor and Facebook, and post flyers in community hotspots. Holding annual neighborhood walks to reassess your progress and to note areas that still need improvement is a good way to keep current. Are flammable juniper and Italian cypress disappearing? Do you need to increase efforts on a neglected aspect of home hardening? Celebrate your successes too. By holding an annual evacuation drill, you are encouraging people to prepare before it's time to go. Preparing a to-go kit, dressing for safety, getting your family and pets prepared, and knowing your evacuation route beforehand goes a long way towards a quick and safe evacuation with less anxiety. Start with our training presentation and follow one of the drills outlined in our evacuation template. Notify your local fire department of serious hazard through their wildfire mitigation specialists. Get to know these folks. They perform defensible space inspections and are your go-to people for hazards in your community. By using these UFAs, you'll be able to engage, educate, and activate your community to make your community safer from the dangers of wildfire.
All right, back again. So Quinn, when we made that opening video, we kind of had a lot of fun with that, sort of a parable. But it certainly is true that a lot of people in communities like Paradise and other areas that were saved because neighbors went over and helped them. Oftentimes, you know who it is, not necessarily your responsibility, but you know, Mrs. Smith, Mr. Jones, somebody else, they don't have a car, they have a mobility issue, whatever, knock on the door, give them a hand, makes a big deal. So we're kind of fans of the whole neighbor helping neighbor thing. How do you think that works in San Rafael?
I think varying levels of success. I think we've got some neighborhoods and even some coalitions of neighborhoods that are really engaged and do a lot. And then we've got some isolated folks and constantly trying to do some outreach and connect. I agree with you. I can't overemphasize the neighbor to neighbor piece. There were some great efforts even over the last year and a half relating to call outs and mental health check-ins and resource check-ins relating to that neighbor helping neighbor idea. And every disaster I've ever worked, it's not unique to wildfire. Like, neighbors are the resource to alert you, to help you safe, and to help you recover. So I think it's so important. I think it has been more challenging over the past year with the isolation. And inherently over the last decade or so, we've seen kind of less neighborhood communication as we've gotten more online, if you will. But really can't emphasize it enough. In the presentation, I do an hour-long presentation specifically on, basically personal preparedness. And almost every time I do it, I say, this is the most important slide. And it's the slide that says, know your neighbors, have those conversations. And it's not just about what you can do to help them, but they might have things that can help you. And that could be something as simple as having a nurse next door that can come over and help deal with, a cut finger or medical emergency or whatever the case may be. Do you have a plan for your pet? Can your neighbors agree that if part of my evacuation plan is making sure your dog or cat isn't home alone, and that I'm going to take them if you're not home? So there's a lot of aspects to it. I really can't overemphasize it. And it doesn't have to be complicated. It can be really basic things. And even things, the example in the video is great. Go knock on the door, come evacuate with us. If that doesn't work, even just blaring your horn while you leave, right? Even just having those conversations in blue skies that say, hey, are you signed up for alerts? Or if you don't want to go quite that formal, just start with, oh, hey, did you hear about? And whatever that last alert you got is, right? It can be the gossip channel, if you will. And if they haven't heard of it, then the answer is they didn't get the alert, and you can help them get signed up for those emergency alerts, because having the information is so essential, and that's the first step towards an evacuation and staying safe.
That's great. Well, you've heard kind of a pitch from us about Firewise Communities, and there's nothing really unique about the program, except that it creates just what you're describing, an opportunity to work with your neighbors, to interface with them, and so forth. So I think you have quite a few Firewise Communities in San Rafael. Is that a growing program there?
Yeah, I think it's going across Marin and across the country. If I let my competitive side out, I'd say we need more. We got to, come on, San Rafael, let's step it up and get some more. And I think the UFAs, if you will, that go over in the video, I think are great steps, and apply to whatever disaster you want to apply them to, honestly. I don't particularly, I work for the fire department. If fire is not your thing, pick something else to talk to your neighbors about. But I think Firewise is a great way to get neighbors talking to neighbors, and the relationships and the network you build through Firewise are going to help you with earthquakes and floods and pandemics and whatever else comes next. But it's such a critical component. And I think it's a great resource we also try to push when someone says, well, what about my neighbor? And the answer is, well, let's do a Firewise community, right? You're worried about this broader issue, and you think your property's perfect, which in most cases isn't quite the case, myself included, honestly. Everyone's got a little bit more they can do. So let's start this Firewise effort, and let's get you working together. And I also want to touch on, it kind of gets glossed over really quickly at the beginning of the video, but there's kind of a volunteer broom pool event that's occurring. And obviously doing that as a Firewise community is great. Doing that as an HOA or a neighborhood association or wherever the case may be. And the city is wholeheartedly in support of these volunteer events. And we will lend you broom pullers, and we will rent you a debris box, and we will do whatever it takes to get your neighborhood together. We'll help you pick sites if you're not sure. We just had a really successful event off Point San Pedro a few weeks ago with on Earth Day. Probably 50 plus people came out, including some of our electeds. And really made a difference in removing some of that invasive broom. And that's what it's going to take in some of these areas. So we're happy to support those efforts, and please reach out if you're interested in that type of an event.
That's great. There's activities like that going on in Marin. So work with San Rafael Fire Department. If you want to know more about Firewise, you certainly can contact Fire Safe Marin. And I won't belabor it, but when you heard the universal Firewise activities, as we call them, it's meant to be simple things. Those don't cost any money. They're easy to do. It's not a big commitment in time, and yet they're very effective. Absolutely. So all of this leads to something Quinn brought up before. None of this is a substitute for personal preparedness. And I'm retired from the San Francisco Fire Department, but I spent a number of years over there working in the Office of Emergency Services, somewhat like Quinn has. And earthquake was the big thing over there. And again, it's personal preparedness just matters, because when the big emergency comes, you're not going to have the resources that you're used to on a daily basis. You need to be able to take care of yourself. If you can take care of yourself, puts you in a better position to help your neighbors when they need it, and we're all going to do a lot better. So let's take a look at that video.
In the following section, you will hear about personal and evacuation preparedness. Long before a wildfire strikes, all Marin residents need to take action to be ready. There are many simple things that you can do today. best advice to help you remain safe during a wildfire is to evacuate early.
When we discuss wildfire preparedness, especially how it relates to evacuation, we like to break it down into 3 topics: ready, set, go. This is a national program that follows the ready, set, go mantra, and it's important. It works. It helps us keep organized. The ready is discussing preparedness, things you do in advance of a fire. Being set is the situational awareness that you need to have when a wildfire is burning in your neighborhood, but really anytime during fire season. And go refers to going early, making the decision to leave. When's it time to evacuate? What situational awareness is when we're referring to a wildfire. Understanding what weather can trigger wildfires, contribute to especially the catastrophic wildfires, is so important.
Hello, I'm Captain Oscar Arenas with the Ross Valley Fire Department. You may have seen signs like this at the entrance of your neighborhood. These signs means that a red flag warning has been declared by the National Weather Service. When that happens, Marin County fire chiefs consult with each other to determine which areas of Marin are most at risk. The chiefs then issue an order for signs to be posted. During red flag warnings, extreme caution is urged for all residents because fires are more likely to ignite, and those that do are more likely to spread and be more difficult to control. Red flag warning conditions are typically related to wind events lasting at least 8 hours. During these events, vegetation is very dry, humidity is low, and no rain has occurred in the last 24 hours. Relative humidity and wind speed are the primary factors driving a red flag warning declaration. Red flag warnings are designated for a specific span of time. The warnings remain in effect until it expires, is canceled, or upgraded.
Situational awareness also has to do with how you get your alerts and warnings. You need to take steps in advance, like now, today, if you haven't already, to ensure that you're going to receive the electronic warnings that we send out. In Marin, we use Alert Marin, we use Nixle. We have options to send out things like the wireless emergency alerts, similar to the presidential alerts that ring every cell phone in a region. We use NOAA weather radios, but you've got to be registered for, and you've got to understand how you might receive alerts when a fire's threatening your community. Alert Marin, I mentioned, this is our primary emergency notification system in Marin County. Virtually every county in Northern California has a similar system. This is how you will receive your emergency notifications when an evacuation for a wildfire is necessary. This is the best tool we've got. It works well. Nixle is a service that's available to any government agency to send out informational notices. We'll oftentimes repeat messages that went out via Alert Marin on Nixle, but we can't target specific street addresses with Nixle. So Nixle, little more broad reach. Because of that, we use it for informational notices that should go out to the entire community rather than targeted messages. Social media, commonly used. It's a great source of information. Your fire department, sheriff's office is probably using social media like Twitter, Facebook, and Nextdoor to get information out. This is going to be lower level information. When we use these notification systems, the terminology that's distributed is really important. An evacuation order. This is the most important message you might receive. This means that you need to evacuate immediately. You're going to take care of your personal safety. An evacuation warning is the next level down. This is a notification that says that you do have some time to prepare. You've certainly got time to prepare yourself, your family, your pets. You also probably have some time to prepare your home. We in Marin County only use the evacuation warning if you have in the belief of the firefighters who are directing the fire, at least 2 hours to evacuate. Oftentimes it's much more. We want you to consider things like battery backups for your garage doors, especially, but also for your communication. For about $99, you can install a garage door battery backup. that will open and shut your garage door. On the packaging for the one they have at Home Depot right now, it says it'll open the door about 50 times during a power outage. It also keeps the button lit up on the wall, makes it easier to find if you need to get out of your garage door at night. And really importantly, it lets you close your garage door behind you. This is important. When you leave, we want you to shut that door behind you to keep embers from blowing into your garage. A battery backup for your phone system can keep your phones ringing. These will run your phones for about 12 hours typically. We want you to be able to receive the phone calls from Alert Marin if the power were to go out overnight while you were asleep and you weren't aware. NOAA weather radios. You're going to hear a lot more about these weather alerting radios. It's what people in the Midwest use to be alerted when a tornado is nearby, and we're going to be using these more and more to alert people to wildfires because they're battery operated and they don't depend on the internet or the grid. Here's this checklist. This checklist is available at firesafemarin.org. On our evacuation page. It's downloadable in a PDF format. You really ought to have one. Divided into 3 columns. The first column are things that you always do when there's a wildfire burning nearby or there's an evacuation warning or order. The second column are things that you'll only do if you have time. So really things that you'll do if there's an evacuation warning or if you're simply concerned because it's maybe a red flag warning has been issued or we're deep into fire season. And the third column are things that you'll do when you're actually evacuating, when you're on the road, once you've left. We need to be prepared for emergencies because we live here in a place that's just constantly confronted by emergencies. Wildfire Go kits have some special needs, but I'll real quickly run through what I think are critical in your Wildfire Go kit. Flashlights. Doesn't matter what time you evacuate, you are going to need a flashlight. And every firefighter I know carries multiple flashlights, one in every pocket, with backup spare batteries. So have a headlamp, have multiple handheld flashlights, and have spare batteries in your Go kit. Make sure that you've got an AM/FM radio. Our checklist goes through items like spending cash, maybe a duplicate credit card, important documents, copies of your passports, your insurance information, a small first aid kit, drinking water. In your Wildfire Go kit, you need to have enough drinking water to get you out of town. You need to have some high energy food. You need to have some basic tools. Store this in a backpack. We want you to be able to put this on your back and move on foot, even though we're going to talk a lot about evacuating by car and why that should be your first choice. It still needs to be portable and something that you can take with you if you do need to leave your car in that outlier scenario. Keep these in your car if you're always with your car or near your front door during fire season. Make a kit for every member of your family, especially for your kids. Make a kit that might be a little different than yours for your pets. It looks like this with your Go kit, a spare set for everybody. And every item shown here, long cotton or wool clothing. Long pants, long shirt. Cotton or wool is important. It won't melt from embers. It won't melt from radiant heat. It provides a huge amount of protection to you. Heavy boots, leather boots. That floppy cotton hat they're wearing is important. It's not there for looks, obviously. It's there to prevent embers from landing in your hair. The 2 pieces of life-saving equipment in this picture and that you need to have in your Go kit are the goggles and the leather gloves. Let me tell you why. The number 1 injury for wildland firefighters are eye injuries. Those gloves, equally life-saving. If debris falls into the roadway during a wildfire and blocks your passage, it fell there because it was on fire. You very well may be able to move that debris out of the road as long as you have protection for your hands. We want you to think about your pets. This isn't just because they're adorable and we love our pets. It's because people love their pets so much that they're willing to die for them. Evacuation routes. That you ought to evacuate by car, you do need to know the route you're taking. We get a lot of questions about what route, what's the safest place, what is my route during a wildfire evacuation. We want you to simplify this and think about your route this way. Take the fastest route to the valley floor. And the map that you see here is a new series of evacuation maps that are being published in Marin communities as we speak.
These are designed to be easily readable under stress by people who are evacuating. The maps are published in a 3-step process with a citywide or a zone map that helps you figure out which local area map or zone map serves your neighborhood. There are links and QR codes that will allow you to download these maps onto your mobile devices or onto your desktop computer. You can print them. Some of the communities will print these and mail them initially to residents in the neighborhoods. The maps are designed to be printed front and back, and they have an evacuation checklist written by FireSafe Marin.
The Marin Wildfire Prevention Authority commissioned an evacuation risk assessment in early 2021, addressing prevention measures that can be implemented to reduce risks that may affect a successful evacuation before it takes place. The evacuation study identifies and quantifies risk factors like topography, vegetation, traffic constraints, the presence of vulnerable populations, the locations of safe refuges, and the level of preparedness of communities. With this information, agencies will be able to determine and to prioritize improvements that can be made to reduce risks. Learn more about the evacuation study at www.marinwildfire.org. We'd like to introduce you to a new evacuation tool that will soon be launched in Marin County, Zone Haven. This app is going to give local agencies instant and constant information that is viewable by the public. Residents will know exactly what zone they're in, where they need to go in an evacuation. It will help with traffic management and where to put traffic control. As the county gets ready to launch Zone Haven, a Know Your Zone campaign will start so residents can learn which zone they live in and how to use the system.
So Quinn, based on our previous experience in doing these, if right now there were large wildfires in Northern California, or particularly a lot of smoke in Marin, we'd have 500 people here at this thing tonight, and everybody would want to know about evacuation. It's always the #1 topic. I think hopefully here were a lot of lessons of what to do to be prepared, but the real trick is be the first one out. If you're prepared, you're ready to go. You're not going to be dealing with a lot of traffic if that happens. So that's kind of like the simplest messaging possible on that. Your thoughts?
Yeah, I mean, you're right. Evacuation is such a hot topic. And to some extent, I think slightly ironically, if you will, because most people, at least before the last year, were pretty good at leaving their house. And in Marin, there's only so many ways you're going to leave your house to go anywhere. So I think that, folks, one, I want to reemphasize the point that's been made in a couple of the videos that evacuation planning has been underway in Marin for a long time. There are existing maps. What we're really trying to do is take what's really known to the firefighters and that's very tactical and make it more consumer friendly, if you will. And that's where the app comes in, and that's also where the Fire Clear campaign comes in. But ultimately, there's not new information on there. The Fire Clear maps are literally just colored maps of the neighborhoods with the roads that exist on any other Google map. I think the big thing with evacuation messaging is we don't want people on fire roads for a lot of reasons, but we don't want you on the fire roads. We want you to stay on pavement. Leave early for sure if you can. And then I think the new concept that is starting to get socialized more and that's coming out a little bit of the Fire Clear campaign is areas of last resort or community refuge areas or any kind of similar concept, which ultimately comes back down to if you can't totally leave the area, how can you get somewhere that's survivable? And that's a concept that firefighters have used for pretty much since they started fighting wildfires, right? Where's my safe zone? Where can I go? The fire can literally burn all around me and I'm just sitting here with my backpack and I'm going to be okay. There are a lot of those places in Marin that I think people kind of fail to think about. Just in San Rafael, the golf courses are great options. Any large parking lot is going to be a good option, which includes schools, malls, etc. Right? All these things we talked about throughout the evening with this idea of defensible space and home hardening, get somewhere that looks like that, that's got that good extended 100-foot zone. And more than likely, and we want you to get out early, right? But last resort stuff, if you can't get out, and we know there's going to be traffic issues, we know there's one-way streets, We're working on evacuation clearance routes in terms of moving vegetation away from the roadsides. There's a lot of conflicts with that with property owners because that's their privacy screening. So we're kind of always in that back and forth battle. Like you said, if you're personally prepared, you have that go bag. I think a list is one of the other most important things. So I know Fire Safe Marin's got the excellent evacuation checklist, but you also need to personalize that. I literally have a list, it's on the back of an envelope on my fridge, right? It's not high tech. And it's, here's the things I can't forget that aren't in my go bag, stuff as simple as my wallet, my cell phone, right? Things like that. And then it gets to some of those other things, like remember to open the gates so that I'm breaking that continuous fuel, right, of my fence to my gate, and to make sure the gates are accessible. And those are really quick bullet points that we can just kind of work down through, but that we are prepared. I just refreshed my water last week, used it to water my plants, which were desperate because I've been very good about my water reduction. So there's really simple stuff. And I think a lot of people get really overwhelmed by personal preparedness. And sorry, I might be rambling. This is just a topic I care so much about, but it's really accessible. And I think in most cases, most of what you need to put in your go bag is stuff you have, right? It's already skewed throughout your house. Maybe it's in your junk drawer, right? Whatever the case may be, it's really just about organizing it, knowing where it is, and making sure things like batteries are still working and flashlights and things like that are still working. So don't get overwhelmed. There's a lot of really accessible things you can do. Like I said, I have a full 1 hour class on personal preparedness if you want more information. I think it's also one of my bad recordings is on YouTube if you want to watch it that way. But we'll do some more of those in the Zoom environment and hopefully in person here pretty soon as well. So can't overemphasize personal preparedness. It goes a long way. And a lot of the evacuation information we're putting out is really less about the route specifically and more about being ready to go and being ready to go quickly and with the right stuff, which should include the rest of your family and your pets and your go bag.
Wow, that is really well put, and personalizing it too at the same time. Really like that. I'll give you my two little pet things. One is in my own community, I'm constantly dealing with, why can't I go on the fire road? Please, you're driving into the area of problems. You need to get down and out. It's really very important in there.
And I think one thing with the fire is, if I can just interject, that a lot of people don't realize we fight fire with fire, right? The whole goal of one of the ways that we can get rid of fuel so the fire can't keep burning is to introduce fire. And so if you're on a fire road, the likelihood of you literally being caught between the uncontrolled fire and the fire that's being started to help stop that, it's up there. And we don't want you to be in those positions, and we want to make sure our fire roads are accessible to our first responders. And like you said, more than likely they're going up and they're going into vegetation and they're going into hazardous areas that do not meet defensible space standards. So please stay off the fire roads. No, we're not going to give you keys. Please don't cut the locks. We don't want you on them.
That's our big takeaway on this one. You brought up the fire clear maps. There's a question about what the fire clear maps are, and are they available for San Rafael residents?
Yeah, so we've been working on them for longer than I care to admit. We had a slight issue with one of the versions, and we're updating them. So we've gotten a lot of community feedback. We were missing refuge areas, and there was just an internal miscommunication. So we're very close to being done. Our hope is to mail those in July. But again, and they'll also be digitally available, but there's not much new information on them. I actually think the mailing campaign is going to do more for the personal preparedness list and the evacuation checklist than telling anybody about some road that they didn't know existed or didn't know connected to a main artery or whatever the case may be. So no two ways out of your home, no two ways out of your neighborhood as best you can. If you don't have two ways out, that early leaving is even more important. And that's a big one. Marin's got a ton of areas that don't have two ways out. So being ready and being able to leave early and having somewhere to go. And that's, I think, right, worst case scenario, you leave early and you didn't need to leave. You go and you spend the night somewhere else. And you sleep reasonably well because you're not worried about being stuck in traffic or some other bad outcome. So be ready, that personal preparedness, and yeah.
That's just great advice. I will give one last plug for a program that's coming, or a project that I think is important, and that is the MWPA evacuation planning, which is a really big project. So a little different than what we're talking about now, but this is really taking a hard look at all of Marin, where are the potential choke points, what things could be done for changing the direction of traffic or other ways to manage the flow of things and whatnot. None of this is magic wand for everybody, but taking a solid look like that, I think is really going to be worth paying attention to. And so again, I applaud MWPA for taking the lead on an important project like that. So
yeah, I see another question in the chat. The FireClear are the evacuation maps. FireClear is a specific brand, and so a lot of the other information and the color coding is the same. And the good thing is the same vendor's been used by most jurisdictions across the county, so there's consistency countywide. So point taken, but yes, the FireClear evacuation maps are exactly that.
Yeah, and you did talk about the areas of refuge, and everybody's going to hear a lot more about that as we go forward. And I think a good example of that, if you look up there in Paradise, a lot of people drove into a Safeway parking lot, and you can see there's just enough buffering in there between the heat and where you are. Stay in your car, that's super important. And you could ride the fire out in there. And so there is, and you pointed out several of them, Quinn, but there's lots of places, oftentimes schools, big parking lots and so forth. And a lot of those will be identified on some of those maps. So that's a little bit of a help that's there.
Yeah, ball fields, but really just, thinking that through in terms of identify those places for where you live and then places you work and frequent. We really do have them all across the city, and they're definitely that resource. And that gets at, again, that ember storm and how we're seeing fire move and the type of fire we're preventing from. So if you're somewhere where an ember is going to land and not do nothing, you are more than likely going to survive. Wildland firefighters don't wear any type of like breathing apparatuses or in very thin protective clothing, and they work within feet of 5 to 10 foot flames. And so it's not to underestimate the risk of fire, but to understand that there are lots of smart ways and things you can do to be safe. What you don't want to do is drive your car into a ditch or off road and then get out while the vegetation you're in is burning. That's not going to be a survivable situation. So yeah, staying in your vehicles, staying in those areas that meet the defensible space standards.
Great. Well, it's time to wrap up here. Jen, do you happen to have the poll handy so we can see? I think people who filled that out, they're probably a little bit of interest in. One of the things I'd be curious to see is what percentage of our viewers tonight were either not informed at all, so 13%, kind of a lot of people right in the middle of there. Few of it to high end, that's great. Wow, 100% signed up for Alert Marin. That's really very good. A lot of people with Go kits.
That's my San Rafael right there.
All right, there you go. You're making an impact. The evacuation plan, I think the way Quinn's been describing it, it's kind of common sense. So the plan is being ready to go pretty much. It's no magic. There won't be a magic road that opens up. People taking some steps to harden their home, clearing around the house, lots of that, that's good. About half of you are Firewise. We have some work to do on this, but I bet some of you are actually in a Firewise neighborhood and may not realize it because we haven't done enough outreach. So anyway, because there's a few who don't know. So that's the results of the poll. Thank you for those who filled that out. And thank you for those who stuck through this. I mean, I know this is a long presentation, but it really is an effort to kind of synthesize all the things we've been talking about all year long, put them in one place. And then we're so fortunate to have had Quinn here tonight. I think you've just done a spectacular job and represented San Rafael very well. I'm sure if somebody still has follow-up questions, they may be able to reach you somehow.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm happy to put my information in the chat, or it's all over the internet somewhere, I'm sure. But quinn.gardner@cityofsanrafael.org. Just really want to, again, appreciate you, Fire Safe Marin, MWPA. I think these workshops have been great. They are long, and I think it's great information. It's information we share with our staff. That's how relevant it is. It's really important that folks know everything they can do, and the steps that you take are what's going to make a difference, not just for your home, but for your community and your loved ones. So appreciate everyone taking the time this evening to put this together and to be a part of it. And ultimately, and it's our motto, right? We're San Rafael Fire, and we're here to help. So reach out if you have questions, concerns, report any concerns you have or issues to us, and we'll do our best to get them addressed amongst our large binder of projects and open space things. And we are normally the grazing is always the question, so I'll just throw that out into the universe. Mid to end of June, we'll start with the goats. That was our contract agreement from last year, and things dried out quicker this year. So we've pushed to get them earlier. We might be able to get them like a week earlier, but unfortunately, we just had some vendors can't change everything last minute because the weather changed. So But they will be here, and we appreciate what they do and what you do, and everybody in between. So keep up all the great work, everyone.
Wonderful. Well, again, thanks so much, Quinn. And behind the scenes, thanks to our team, Meg McCabe, Aaron, Jen Glana, who helped put all this together. Couldn't be done without them. Appreciate that. And again, one last shout out to MWPA for making this all possible. So with that, good night, everybody, and hope you will join us at our future webinars. We have one come up later this month that I think will be very important, which is really environmental concerns that you need to be thinking about when you're doing defensible space and landscaping around your home. So hope to see you then. Good night, everyone.